Yeah, all right. So I started recording. As you know, this meeting is recorded and will be uploaded to public internet. Um, uh, so I know that it's Chinese New Year and many of the folks are not online today. So we can make it a short one. Now that we've started this meeting, we can just give an update on some of the stuff that we've been working on. I got a chance to go and review the new version of the E-class proposal, the PR. Yeah, so if I want to give you guys a quick update on what it is, it's essentially, basically the idea here is that we come up with you can imagine it this way. Let's say that we put all the pods which have the same controller reference. Basically, all the pods that are, for example, created by the same replica set or by the same stateful set and so on, all collections, into the same group. And then once a pod, in order to simplify, I can say it this way. Imagine that this group is the one in our scheduling queue. So it's not exactly implemented like this, but conceptually it's like this. So let's say that once this pod reaches, or this group reaches to the head of the queue, if it is unschedulable, everything in that group becomes unschedulable, which makes sense, right? And if it's schedulable, let's say that we pick one pod from this group and we determine that this is schedulable, then the scheduler keeps picking from that and trying to schedule more of those. At first glance, it made sense to me, but when I thought a little bit more about it, I noticed a problem with this design. The problem is that if there are pods that are created by the same replica set controller at various times, for example, let's say that a huge replica set controller, which creates, I don't know, 2,000 replicas, and another one which creates a different, let's say, replica set that creates another 2,000 pods, are starting almost at the same time. So you start creating pods at various times over, let's say, an hour until all these 2,000 pods are created. If for some reason one of the pods of the replica set 1 gets to the head of the queue, and if the scheduler, for example, is slower, than scheduling rate of the scheduler is slower than the rate at which pods are created, then the scheduler will keep scheduling all the pods from that first replica set and not getting into the second replica set until all those replicas are scheduled. This has a fairness issue, basically. The scheduler never gets to the second replica set pods until it's finished with the first ones. In order to solve this problem, I propose in that PR that we should probably change this design to something a little different. So instead of this concept of moving sort of like a group inside the scheduling queue, we should keep the current or the existing logic of the scheduling queue, which is basically having a pod being moved into the scheduling queue. But once a pod is determined as unschedulable, we store its controller reference or some sort of a hash. Doesn't have to be a controller reference. It could be a controller reference for simplicity, or at least for the first version, in a different set. If another pod comes to the head of the queue, the scheduler picks it up. If it has the same controller reference as a controller reference that is in the unschedulable set, then we determine that this pod shouldn't be schedulable either, because another one with the same characteristics were not schedulable, so this one is not schedulable. Right? When certain events happen in the cluster, for example, a new node is added to the cluster, or a new a pod is terminated in the cluster, and stuff like that. We have these events that causes a pod, unschedulable pods to be moved to the active queue today. Similar events will cause that set to be emptied, basically, potentially marking all the pods schedulable again. And then the scheduler will retry these pods, and as soon as they become, they get to the head of the queue and they become unschedulable or determined as unschedulable, it adds those control references back to the set. So this one probably has a little bit slower performance compared to the approach that is currently implemented, because we still keep considering pods one by one, and we keep looking up that map, that unschedulable map that we're building. But it at least doesn't have that fairness issue that we were talking about. Another benefit of this approach is that it almost does not need any major changes to the scheduling queue or anything to the actual scheduler that currently, the logic of the scheduler that exists today. I'm working with the author of the PR and also Harry. Hopefully we can get this done at some point. I don't think we can get it into 1.14 though. So that was kind of a not short at all, long description of what this is, but this is important because this is going to be an important change to some of our important logic. One other thing that some of you guys are already aware is that we are moving priority and preemption to GA in 1.14. I have sent a bunch of PRs for doing that, including promoting the API, adding a cap for promoting, and also, excuse me, I'm still not fully recovered from a flu, but anyhow, those PRs are gradually getting merged. All right, another item that I have is that I think going forward, we need to pay a little bit more attention to the scheduling throughput. Excuse me. So I actually added a document which is still under review for how to run scheduler benchmarks. That document is useful for people who want to try running the benchmarks or finding areas where they can help improve the scheduler's performance. But it's also important because I think going forward, we want all the major changes to the scheduler to be accompanied with the results, sort of like before and after results of running the benchmarks. So running the benchmarks maybe in the head, and then running the benchmarks in your fork with your changes, and then giving those results in the PR that you send for making changes to the scheduler. Of course, this doesn't need to exist in all the PRs. For example, non-trivial, trivial PRs don't need to have this information, but other PRs should probably have this information to make sure that our performance is preserved over time. And hopefully we can improve performance gradually as well. So yeah, these are all the updates that I wanted to give today. If you have questions or comments or you have updates for us, please go ahead and share with us. I see that Klaus is here today. I wasn't expecting him to show up, but yeah. All right. Is there any other questions or comments? If not, we can actually cut this meeting short. I hope Klaus is not talking because we don't hear him. He unmuted himself, but we cannot hear him talking.
Oh, I'm okay. Overall, it's yes. Yes.
All right.
I have no additional comments for now. Yeah.
All right. Good.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Then we can finish this meeting today. For all of those you guys who are in China, Happy New Year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye until next week.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.